Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM Newstalk Radio. We're chatting tonight about COVID-19 again with Alex Vezina, the CEO of preparedcanada.ca or .com?
.ca.
.ca. Alex is a emergency preparedness expert. He's got an undergraduate degree and a master's, and he is the CEO of this company that does preparedness consultation, training, etc., for different companies, and he's an expert on what's going on with COVID-19. And Alex, you just told me that the German finance minister committed suicide because of stress related to COVID-19.
That's what's being reported. I mean, it's been reported today, so I'm not sure. But if the German news is saying it, then we might want to pay attention and wait for updates.
Supposedly, he left a message that he just could not live up to people's expectations for what needed to be done to deal with the virus and the economic follow-up from
Yep,
that. So
that's what's being said so far.
It's obviously pretty concerning. So you're a preparedness expert. We've chatted before about COVID-19 and what needs to be done. We're a couple of weeks into this, well, a couple of months into it from a worldwide standpoint, but a couple of weeks into it from a Canadian standpoint. What do you think the big issues are today?
Big issues in terms of people, business, government, etc.
Yes.
Could you refine it for me? No, which one?
All of the above. So, yeah, what do you think people need to be doing today? And I think what you think is people are responding reasonably well, staying at home and staying safe distance. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the most part, right? We were talking about this quite a bit before, but it reminds me of something that I was taught when I was first introduced to counterterrorism and people who do particularly bad and academically interesting things. Everyone falls into what the person who originally taught me this calls the normal distribution of bad word I can't say on radio. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because most people, and if you know what a normal distribution is, this will make sense, but most people are just trying to get by and do what they need to survive and help out their family, and they understand that people are dying and that they need to stay home, and they appreciate that we're sacrificing quite a bit economically to protect our elderly and our vulnerable. And most people are there.
Right.
But there is that 1% in the extreme that are exceptionally giving and going above and beyond, which is the people you see sacrificing above and beyond and doing a lot more to help. And then there are the other people, the other 1%, the other extreme, that are taking advantage of people and doing things that are very, very counterproductive. So in large part, yes, most people are doing what they should be doing, but you're going to hear in the news, and you are hearing in the news about people that are doing bad things. And once again, this is very few people, but it's made louder a lot when you hear it reported in the news. And I want to make people aware of what some of those people are doing.
Such as what? What are you considering?
So such as, for example, cybercrime is the biggest thing that I'm worried about, frankly. There has been an uptick in cybercrime recently. More people are trying to commit ransom-based crimes. More people are trying to get access to banking information than before. You're seeing more spam email attempts going out to large numbers of people in an attempt to compromise your personal information. So if you get an email, for example, of "we just got your COVID-19 test back, please give us your SIN number" or something like that. Don't click the link, don't trust it, don't download whatever the thing told you to download, unless it's something like from your doctor that instructed you that from that email they would be sending you it. If it's suspicious, don't click on it, which to some people might sound obvious, but a lot of people haven't heard that before.
Right.
And a lot of people don't really think about this stuff often, and you don't want your identity stolen.
I understand there's an increase in telephone calls and emails from the supposed Revenue Canada account.
Oh God, yeah.
Deliver cash to a certain location, otherwise the police will be after you. I get an email on a daily basis probably that my Rogers email is about to blow up, and so therefore you've got to download something rather to make sure that it stays going. Not sure if that's true or not, but I don't.
Well, I mean, if it was really an issue, then someone would be showing up at your house and it would be verified by someone with a badge pretty fast, right? But you're seeing more of these things attempted in large part, and people who are vulnerable to this type of deception, stereotypically or atypically, you're looking at elderly people that aren't as strong with technology as people who have grown up with it from a young age.
Right.
Because they're forced to be at home for even longer now, and all communication is going through the internet,
Right.
basically, for these people.
Okay, so
Are even more vulnerable to it. So cybersecurity is one big thing.
Okay, and you know, you work for companies and you also work for people. Lots of companies are faced with a situation where all of a sudden they've got a lot of employees working from home. If you were working for a company and you're worried about cybersecurity with a whole bunch of distributed workers around on home computers, what would you do?
Well, you have to ask yourself a question as to whether or not work from home is actually feasible. For some companies, the appropriate strategy might be that you have to close down for the risk. Many companies can't actually afford a risk of their security being breached at this level. And depending on the way your work from home strategy is designed, and depending on how secure the at-home computers are for your employees that are working from home, which is probably not very secure, you do not want to make it so a hostile actor can get into your computer server through an easily compromisable home network. If you're a business that would be shut down by a breach like that, you might have to basically shut down any of these work from home sites.
Okay, well, I've
for
heard
security reasons. You may have to or may not, right?
Yeah, I've heard suggestions about working offline and only interacting with the network on a limited basis, and
right.
insulating yourself so that you're not like 24/7 connected to the computer network itself.
Right, but if depending on the type of infiltration that's done at the home computer, they could activate whenever they open up to the main network, to the main company server anyways. So it just depends. By and large, the first thing that they should be doing is working on the social fixes, the how to open emails properly, the how not to download an attachment, the how to not get a bad email thing. And actually, most ransomware attacks and most cyber attacks that have happened in recent history have been because of someone wasn't following the policy or procedure, or someone wasn't trained on don't click on that button. And that's why they got successfully attacked or hacked.
So it's primarily attachments and clicking on buttons that are the way that a virus gets into you.
Well, that's most of them. And the reason for that is because most attacks, this gets really complicated, but most attacks, when they happen, the actor sends out a widespread phishing net. They send out a big net, think about it that way. And they hope that they get a catch on the net somewhere. So they'll send out some sort of email to 1 million people. And they don't have to individually do any serious work trying to hack those people. They wait for one person to tug on the net, and then they start going after them. The tug on the net is when you open up the attachment. The tug on the net is when you reply to that person. It's when you don't just have it be basically like a dead email.
Okay, so cybersecurity.
So
what else are you concerned
with? If you don't open it up, it was a failed attempt and the actor stops caring.
What else are you
I'm secured with, I'm concerned with, and once again, this is a very, very small percentage of people. I don't want people getting panicky and thinking that their neighbors are attacking them. I'll get into that in a second. I'm concerned with people who are saying they have COVID-19 that don't have COVID-19. Right. I'm concerned with people that are putting huge undue stress on the emergency services when they're already stressed. And you've seen this in the past with other things like swatting, and we've seen some cases of swatting during COVID-19, which is absolutely ludicrous. Do you know what swatting is?
No, what is swatting?
Okay, so swatting was popularized largely with streaming online video games. And these people who, they make their livelihood playing a video game and live. They're live for like 10 hours a day. What people would do is they would find out their home addresses, and then they would call in a child abduction or some sort of massive, they'd say the person was going to plan and shoot up a school or something, and they'd call the 911 service of that person's town and get SWAT to show up live on camera while this person is streaming some video game, break into the house, and the SWAT thinks this is a person who's going to attack a school. They're going to do their job, right? So that's basically what swatting is. Someone weaponizing 911 services for illicit purposes. Highly illegal, obviously, not a very good idea, deplorable thing to do, but some people do this stuff because they get a laugh out of it, which is ludicrous.
Even innocuous overloading of 911 services are bad. Numerous different municipalities have set up separate lines for reporting of people that aren't social distancing or reporting, COVID-19 things. Clearly what emergency preparedness people are trying to do is separate out real emergencies that should be on 911 from other telephone calls that should be on other services.
Yes. However, I'm talking about people who are reporting in things that should be going to regular 911. Right, because if there was a legitimate
right. And you're
case
saying that
of
they're using it to do a fake one,
basically, and which is a seriously criminal act. You're mobilizing large amounts of resources to prank someone, basically.
Okay, what's the solution to that? There's no solution other than being vigilant in stopping it.
Well, there's that. Although I would suggest to the people who make that their career, if they're very, very concerned about swatting, they could form a relationship with their local police service and let them know that they do this. Not that they SWAT, but that they live stream something and that they're live all the time, and that they expect they may get a harassment call from someone and that they have X, Y, Z things in the house, or work with the police so when they get something in, there's something on file. Because then the police have something to go off of other than no history, and we have to deal with this potential event. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, but
okay. So I'll try to reword that for you. If you have a particular type of risk and you can work with emergency services to make emergency services jobs easier, emergency services tend to be very open and receptive and willing to work with you. So if your greatest risk as a online video game streamer is some troll on the internet that wants to ruin your day with SWAT showing up, then you might want to contact your local police force before the event happens and say, by the way, this is my career, this is what I do, and this is what someone might try to do because the internet is the internet. So that when they get a report, there's something on file. And they know it might be a false call. Okay. Further, if you're live streaming, they can probably just bring up your live stream and see what you're doing at that given time. So the investigation isn't necessarily immediately going in guns a-blazing. Okay, it's an alternate.
So cybersecurity, swatting. What else are you concerned about?
Once again, people reporting that they have COVID-19 when they don't have COVID-19 because what was the case that happened in Mississauga a few days ago, or in Ontario a few days ago? It's escaping me at this moment. But someone said, I believe it was a pharmacy. I'm going to be wrong. Someone said that they had COVID-19 and they didn't, and it resulted in a shutdown of the business. Right. Where they reported it happened. Everyone had to go home. They had to lock the whole place down. And then when they found out that actually wasn't the case, it did huge amounts of economic damage to that business, panicked a bunch of people, got a whole bunch of people hugely concerned, and put the whole medical mechanism of protecting and locking down an area into high gear when it wasn't necessary. Right? A whole bunch of resources were dedicated to the area. People were panicked, etc., because someone wanted to say they had COVID-19, which could have been a prank, could have been because they wanted the day off work, could have been whatever reason. Someone put their own interests above the interests of everyone around them and made everybody's life worse during the time. That type of stuff concerns me because it's counterproductive.
Yeah.
Right? Making this a bit lighter because this is starting to get quite dark. Right? You like quotes. I know you like quotes. I know that both of us can appreciate a famous person saying thought-provoking things.
Yep.
And I know that you like FDR.
I do.
So I got you an FDR quote that I thought you'd like.
Awesome.
Related to fear, because I think people are getting very afraid, and I think there's another way to think about this. And I found that this quote actually is very in line with what I do, with what people who are on the front line in medicine do, and frankly, almost everyone I know in military, emergency services, etc. This is in line, and I think everyone can think about stuff like this. So, quoting FDR, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. Short, sweet, easy quote. Break it down a bit.
Do you know that Governor Andrew Cuomo used that quote in one of his
He did. And it's been used a few other times too recently. And I've heard it used a few times, and I've heard it used other times throughout history that are not like this, because nothing's been like this in history for almost 100 years. But I like that quote, and breaking down what that means for people and thinking about that. It's okay to be afraid, but it's not a good idea, or it's not productive. I'm not going to say it's not okay, but it's not in your best interest to let the fear paralyze you and make it so you're unable to do things that are critical and more important right now. No, I would assume that most people listening would not let fear get in the way of them being able to feed their kids, right?
Right.
Important thing to do, you're going to do it. But there are other things in your life that may be very important that you have to do. And if fear is getting in your way and stopping you from doing that, it could be very counterproductive and really not in your best interest. I think one other thing around people being afraid that they're not going to have livelihoods, or the economic damage is going to be so severe in the near future, is people are some people are afraid of what they're going to do financially.
Yep.
And it is leading to a lot of panic decision making. And we talked about the chicken pox party thing maybe 2 weeks ago now, right? We talked about that, and you're starting to see some countries around the world actually do that because of fear of economic damage. Except there has been talk, I have to confirm it, it might have been a blog post from some doctor in Israel, but I've started seeing doctors say in science papers and start suggesting the idea that certain countries should be allowing all of the non-vulnerable people to go out and work and just let the thing spread, and then isolate, quarantine, etc., lock down all of the vulnerable people, because the economic damage is going to be so great that it'll be unrecoverable or something like that. I don't know if I exactly agree with that or not. That's a lot of hypothetical, we'll find out if we were right or wrong in 30 years from now type of stuff. But the arguments are not scientific. They're not being thought out. When I mentioned the chickenpox party thing, I mentioned that I'd like to see a proposal on it, right? Something that's thought out, something that looks at the risk on both ends, whether or not you can actually secure people, etc. You're starting to hear these fear arguments on, okay, well, the economic damage is going to be so bad, we just have to sacrifice all our grandparents, which it's not scientific. You're not thinking things out, right? It's making this dichotomy of I have to either have health or an economy. I can't have both. I have to choose between my job and my parents or my grandparents. You know what I mean? It's overly simplistic, and it's not really productive. So I think that people should be taking this quite simple FDR quote that could be fairly profound if you think about it, and using it a bit more when they're doing planning.
Alex Vezina, thanks very much for your concerns and elevating them. We're going to take a break and come back with more with Alex in just a minute. Stay with us. Hello and welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I wanted to bring back Alex Vezina, who's the CEO of Prepared Canada, an emergency preparedness company. Alex has got an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree in preparedness, emergency preparedness, and he's been on my show previously talking about COVID-19, about the coronavirus, and we've heard from Diane Francis and other people about how she thinks we should take a far more strenuous route to controlling this infection. She talked about measures taken in China and South Korea and elsewhere in regards to tracking people. She really wants governments to get far stronger in isolating people, particularly people that are vulnerable, but also people that might be infected. She actually talked about an app that they had developed in South Korea where if you were either infected and or you were subject to someone that was infected, you had to register whenever you went out of the house and how long you were out of the house and why you were going out of the house. I spoke to someone in Paris, France, and they actually are demanding that be written down if you go outside of the house in Paris, France today. And then at the same time, on the other side, we've got a gentleman by the name of Dr. Keats that was on Fareed Zakaria and also published an article in the New York Times that was stating that the impact of this social isolation, social distancing, stay-at-home rules is going to be so dramatically negative to the economy that it could cause a great depression, not just a recession. And that, and I mean simplistic in my description of his comments. The guy is a leading epidemiologist in the United States, but he was saying, track the statistics, know exactly who are the people that are vulnerable and not vulnerable. And what we may need to do is to create herd immunity by allowing young people to go back to work and have young people that will catch the virus and either be mildly symptomatic and or asymptomatic to get infected, develop immunity, develop the herd immunity. For sure, he was saying we should be sheltering the vulnerable at home and ensuring that they don't get infected. But that his comment was it's far easier to shelter at home 30 million people that are vulnerable than 330 million people in total. So, with one extreme of let's use draconian measures comparable to South Korea or China, or lax, let's get infected and go and develop herd immunity. Where do you come in?
Well, 2 weeks ago, I described both of those. The 2 weeks ago, I that was our conversation. I said that you have two strategies you can adopt. It's either option A or option B, and doing anything in between is basically a waste of time.
Well, but we're doing the thing in between, which is
that's
what
the problem.
Francis's argument is that we're trying
right.
to we're trying to get people to stay home, but we're not enacting emergency preparedness and emergency measures act. We're not using the police. We're not using apps. In South Korea, Saudi Arabia, they use drones to monitor people and broadcast go home messages, etc. So we're in between.
So, and I think there's reasons for that. I think this is a matter of, you could make arguments that the government's incompetent because they haven't done it fast enough, which is one argument you can make. But I think more likely this is a matter of political expediency and building up enough political capital to make it so they can do this. What do I mean by that? If the government, they being the government, being the American government or the Canadian government, frankly, but with the American government, this isn't even more poignant. If the government reduced all civil liberties and civil freedoms in one fell swoop before we had confirmed cases in large numbers, the backlash and political capital it would have eroded may have resulted in people widespread just leaving anyways, and you wouldn't have been able to control the outbreak. So there is an argument for public health that you're better off slowly clamping down on the government or clamping down on society and slowly locking things down more and more, because you will have less resistance from people because they will basically tell you to do it, and then you have the political capital necessary to do it.
But as you pointed out, if we wait too long, it's too late.
Yep, and that's kind of the catch-22 when you have a free society. In a lot of countries where they've locked everything down, they've also had history where they drive people over with tanks. And when you have a government that does stuff like that, when the government says you have to do X, Y, Z, the people tend to say, okay, I'd rather not make this government angry. We live in a free society, and unfortunately or fortunately, that means that we tend to need political capital to do things. Now, I said 2 weeks ago that I would have preferred, and it's on your website, you can hear it. I've said that I would prefer it if we went on complete lockdown, not 50 or less people gatherings, no gatherings, right? Everyone who knows how this thing works, who doesn't factor in political capital and whether or not people will revolt and just do it, or even if they do, basically says that if you want to stop a bunch of old people and vulnerable people and people with vulnerable people, it categorizes everybody. If you want to stop a bunch of vulnerable people from dying from this, you need to stop everyone from moving. You
need to stop everyone from moving.
Okay, and I'm going to say something which is going to sound completely radical, but I want you to think about this. You need to look at whether or not you can logistically shut down all public transit, stop people from moving, period. We're talking measures that no one has considered.
But health workers need to use public transit.
Well, we can talk about whether or not we can get them specialized buses or specialized one occupancy rider, subsidized Uber or something, or subsidized taxis. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we need to do, but I'm talking about policies like that that are that extreme are the things that we should be talking about.
So Diane Francis suggested
if we're doing
during the Middle Ages in the bubonic plague, if you were infected and or anyone in your house was infected, if you had to go out to the store, you had to carry a big pole with hay on top to signify to everyone else, stay away, because I've got or might have the plague. Are we going to go to a situation where we've got to notify people with some sort of something or other if we venture out of our house, if we've either been infected or been exposed to someone that's been infected?
No. Different thinking. So different time, different understanding of viruses, and when you can transmit before you're symptomatic, that doesn't necessarily work. So in principle, I believe she is making a colorful example with imagery to illustrate a point, obviously,
yes.
Right? But practically speaking, it would be a bit different than that. However, historically, what we have done is with certain viruses, I believe it was tuberculosis, but I forget at this time. We created hospitals where only people who had been infected or who were currently infected, and I'm speaking healthcare workers, could work. So you had zones set up where it was guaranteed infected, and they had specialized zones where if you had suspected COVID-19, or for example, like whatever previous virus was, but we're speaking COVID-19 now, that would be the specialized hospital zone. We could be theoretically, if we're expecting this to go everywhere, rapidly build specialized COVID hospitals where we could, and this is a big ask for healthcare workers that are already doing a lot, where we could be sending healthcare workers that have it or have had it as specially designated to deal with just it there.
So my understanding is something exactly the way some hospitals in China were operating. That they
don't have a choice, and that's the thing. When you
COVID-19 patients, and they were only infected or previously infected COVID-19 healthcare workers.
Exactly. But we need to be building them, and we need to be talking about doing that. We should be talking about that 2 weeks to a month before we need to do it. And this comes back to testing. And a lot of people don't really understand this about testing, although the healthcare system sure does. The testing numbers you're seeing are a snapshot of what was happening a week ago.
Yeah.
But people aren't saying this enough. And when we see that there are X number of cases today, this is a snapshot of what it was like a week ago. Think about the rate that these things are increasing. The healthcare system,
every 2 days.
Sorry?
Doubling every 2 days.
Right. So the healthcare system is assuming that the number they're dealing with is actually a much larger number than what the test number says.
Yeah.
So
this came real to me in an article in the Ottawa Citizen last Sunday, where there were 49 confirmed cases in Ottawa at the time, but the head of public health thought there were 40,000 cases in total. And his rationale was that number one, the tests were what were reported, and those were a couple of days old, as you mentioned. And then number two, he said that what this virus does is it infects on average 2.6 people, and it goes to another generation of infection every half a day, so that over 5 days you've got 10 generations of infection, and that first person is infected 4,000 people by the end of those 5 days. And so he was using that to extrapolate that he thought there were actually 40,000 people, not 49 people. And he said, we're not 10 times wrong, we're 100 times wrong.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I get the argument.
But are we 100 times wrong or 10 times wrong? Like right now, I think
I think the phrasing is kind of, anyone who works in this industry knows that you're dealing with limited intelligence as limitations. I don't mean intelligence as in intelligence. I mean intelligence as an information gathering. So you have limitations on how timely it is and what you're reacting off of. And because of how testing is done, you know you're working off of that. So it's not that we're wrong, it's that we're playing catch up because you have to, because tests are not instant, and you can't test 10,000 people in an hour and have the results back. Right. Like it's not possible. So it's not a matter of being,
and how much out of date and how big out of date, we don't know, but they're out of date.
Yeah, but they're always out of date.
Yeah.
So, and public health knows they're dealing with out of date information, which is why they're making assumptions based on what they think it is. almost everything in emergency management is based on estimation, because you're dealing with events that always change faster than you could really move, and you're dealing with events that are so variable that it takes you, like, for example, it's like trying to solve a problem that you have 5 minutes to fix that takes 3 months to analyze.
Yeah.
You have to fix it in 5 minutes. Use your best estimate. Now, the good thing is we need tests to estimate it all, but it's not like the tests are the solution here. They need to be done, because if not, you have no information, and you need information to do stuff with this. But people are looking at these testing numbers. I don't mean people like healthcare workers. I mean, just it's being reported like these testing numbers are the be all and end all. And there's a lot more going on in anything like this. I know that you wanted me to talk about your favorite article there about the person who said that the social damage is going to be really bad. So could you remind me as to what I was commenting on there specifically?
Yeah. You know what? I'd like you, if you wouldn't mind, repeat for me your FDR quote.
Okay. We'll grab. I know you love FDR. You really do. Okay. So.
And I think that, in today's situation, we've talked about a bunch of negative.
It really is a good quote.
I think his comment is particularly appropriate.
Right. So courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. So key in on there, and I'm done the quote now. It's a pretty nice, short, sweet quote. You can be afraid, but you need to, you ought to, it'd be nice if you could, and I don't like telling people they need to do anything. You ought to, or it'd be good if you could, focus on the stuff that you know is more important than it, and put your energy towards that instead of being afraid as best you can. So
I think it's great advice from both Alex Vezina, CEO of Prepared Canada, as well as Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Courage is not the absence of fear. Tell me the quote again.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So we got, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear.
So courage overcomes fear effectively. And you can be afraid, but let's be courageous.
Yeah, I think it's more than that, but yeah, in principle, sure.
I think today's situation calls for courageous. As you know, Alex, you and I and your father have previously talked about potentially climate change being the issue for our generation. Frankly, I think right now the issue for our generation is how we deal with the worst coronavirus, the worst virus, the worst epidemic to hit us since the Spanish flu in 1919, and or frankly maybe even the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages. And how we deal with it is going to be how good our economy is, how great our population is, and it's going to tell us how we value lives, because those two ends of those two extremes that we talked about earlier are a trade-off between the economy and lives. And
they are.
It's going to be interesting to see how different governments, different politicians, different political parties, different people play on that. And
how much longer do I have, Brian?
That's it.
Okay. Well, can I do a plug?
Sure.
Okay. So one thing that I'm doing, a lot of businesses are starting to do this now, but I'm starting to see a lot of my clients and a lot of businesses struggling with this. And I've decided, just as a matter of expediency and to help out, all of my pandemic planning based services, I can't run my first aid services anymore ethically, because people touch each other in first aid class, and you can't during this. But all of my pandemic based services for the next 3-4 months while this is going on, I'm just offering free. So anything on my site, call up the company, send us an email. If you're a small business or a medium business, or even frankly a large business that doesn't have pandemic planning, or that thinks that they could use some extra feedback, we're doing it free, because a lot of you don't think you have money, and I'd rather see you in business so that you can possibly be my client in a year than see you bankrupt.
Alex Vezina, what's your website?
Prepared.ca.
Prepared.ca. Alex Vezina, CEO of preparedcanada.ca. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much, everybody. That's the Brian Crombie Radio Hour in Saga 960 AM. We're on every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Come back and listen to us again. Bye.